Hi everyone, today we are going to review the magical realism elements in A Very Old Man with Enormous Wings, and we're also going to touch on some of the religious connections in the text. So, after reading A Very Old Man with Enormous Wings, what you want to do is go through and start breaking down the text and analyzing the text to find the meanings behind the magical realism and what the magical realism is trying to tell us about this world, which is a realistic world, our world, and what Gabriel Garcia Marquez is trying to make a statement about. So, the two main things in this that he is using are religious elements and magical realism. So, let's first go through and see what magical realism elements are within the story. So, the first element of magical realism that we find in the story is in the very first sentence. It says, "On the third day of rain, they had killed so many crabs inside the house that Pelayo had to cross his drenched courtyard and throw them into the sea." At first glance, this may not seem like it's a magical element, but if you have any knowledge of the beach, whether you've been there or you've read about it or you've watched something about it on TV, beaches and the homes along the coast are not usually swarming with crabs. Um, you may see one on the beach, but this isn't normal. And because this isn't normal, because this is an unreal element, this is magical realism. And you'll notice here they thought that the temperature that the newborn child had was due to the stench of the crabs. Also, usually a smell is not typically related to a temperature. So you have this as a magical element. Going down, we see the second magical element, and this is one of the main ones. Pelayo had saw a very old man laying face down in the mud who, in spite of his tremendous efforts, couldn't get up, impeded by his enormous wings. And you'll notice that throughout the text, they call this very old man with enormous wings an angel, but we never are certain that he is an angel. We just know that he's a man with wings. That is our second example of magical realism. Going through, we know that Pelayo and Elisinde are frightened of the old man with wings because he looks so decrepit, which means that he looks worn down. And so at first they are frightened of him because he is so unfamiliar. They don't understand who he is or what he is. At first, they thought he was a sailor because they thought that he had a sailor's voice, and then the neighbor woman thought that he was an angel. And here is your third example of magical realism. And yet they called in a neighbor woman who knew everything about life and death to see him, and all she needed was one look to show them their mistake. So, because this is magical realism, again, like the element with the crabs, when it makes the statement everything about life and death, sometimes you would read that as non literal. But in this sense, this woman is saying that she does know everything about life and death. So that is another element of magical realism. And then she states, "He's an angel," she told them. "He must have been coming for the child, but the poor fellow is so old that the rain knocked him down." So defining him as an angel is our fourth element of magical realism. As we go on, we see more and more examples. So, in the fourth paragraph, it says, "Against the judgment of the wise neighbor woman, for whom angels in those times were the fugitive survivors of a celestial conspiracy." So, this is another example of magical realism, and this is also an example of a religious element. So this lady thought that, or the neighbor woman thought that this angel, this old man with enormous wings, was actually a fugitive survivor. So someone who was on the run of a celestial conspiracy. So a heavenly or otherworldly conspiracy. So this lady actually thought that this was a prisoner angel. And then we keep reading. It says, "In the middle of the night when the rain stopped, Pelayo and Elisinde were still killing crabs. A short time afterward, the child woke up without a fever and with a desire to eat. They felt magnanimous and decided to put the angel on a raft with fresh water and provisions for 3 days and leave him to his fate on the high seas." This isn't apparent at first glance, but they relate the child's fever breaking to the angel appearing. So in their mind, this is a miracle, and you'll remember that a miracle is an example of magical realism. Going down, it says, without the slightest reverence, tossing him things to eat through the openings in the wire as if he weren't a supernatural creature, but a circus animal. Here's another example of magical realism. A lot of magical realism texts have carnival-like settings or themes. And so here is another element of magical realism. They were treating this person who is seen differently as a circus animal. Then we go on and we meet Father Gonzaga, who is a priest in the Catholic Church, and Catholicism is based upon Christianity. So this is where you would look at and find a lot of your religious elements. It says that he arrived before 7 o'clock, alarmed at the strange news. By that time, onlookers less frivolous than those at dawn had already arrived, and they were making all kinds of conjectures concerning the captive's future. The simplest among them thought that he should be named Mayor of the World. You all know that there are no mayors of the world. There are leaders of nations, but there's no one world leader. So this is another example of magical realism. Others of sterner mind felt that he should be promoted to the rank of 5-star general in order to win all wars. We know that there has been world wars, but again, every world war is fought between nations. There is not one war to end all wars. And this is also a religious element. This is giving you a look into the idea of the end of times happening. And so they're connecting this angel showing up to religious and magical realism elements, saying that he could be the one to win all wars in a magical realism way, and then also in a religious way, thinking that the end of times might be coming, and this is his purpose. Some visionaries hoped that he could be put to stud in order to implant the earth a race of winged wise men who could take charge of the universe. This is another element of magical realism, and it shows just the lack of humanity from the actual humans in this story. They're literally saying, let's breed this animal or this angel to create a new race of men. But Father Gonzaga, before becoming a priest, had been a robust woodcutter. Standing by the wire, he viewed his catechism in an instant and asked them to open the door so that he could take a close look at that pitiful man who looked more like a huge decrepit hen among the fascinated chickens. He was lying in the corner, drying his open wings in the sunlight among the fruit peels and breakfast leftovers that the early risers had thrown him. Alien to the impertinences of the world, he only lifted his antiquarian eyes and murmured something in his dialect when Father Gonzaga went into the chicken coop and said good morning to him in Latin. Here's a good example of a religious element. Good morning to him in Latin. The parish priest had his first suspicion of an impostor when he saw that he did not understand the language of God or know how to greet his ministers. Then he noticed that, seen up close, he was much too human. He had an unbearable smell of the outdoors. The backside of his wings was strewn with parasites, and his main feathers had been mistreated by terrestrial winds. Nothing about him measured up to the proud dignity of angels. So again, this could be a magical realism element, or you could switch it and make it into a religious element. And so they're basing all of their theories about who this is based upon their idea of religion. And their idea of religion is something noble, something otherworldly, and something beautiful. This old man with enormous wings is otherworldly, but does not possess the proud dignity of angels that they have in their mind. So they are disconcerting him. They're throwing him aside and treating him badly because he does not measure up to what they envision. Then he came out of the chicken coop and in a brief sermon warned the curious against the risks of being ingenuous. He reminded them that the devil had the bad habit of making use of carnival tricks in order to confuse the unwary. Again, this is a good example of a religious element. Father Gonzaga keeps telling and keeps giving warnings to the crowd, warning them not to be fooled by by the angel or by the old man with enormous wings, saying we have to be very careful of what we believe. But at the same time, while he's saying all of this, they're treating the angel or the old man with enormous wings horribly. He argued that if wings were not the essential element in determining the difference between a hawk and an airplane, they were even less so in the recognition of angels. He's saying that the wings themselves are not the determining factor of what an angel is. Nevertheless, he promised to write a letter to his bishop so that the latter would primate, so that the latter would write to the Supreme Pontiff. Sorry, I'm getting mixed up. In order to get the final verdict from the highest courts. So Father Gonzaga is writing to the Supreme Pontiff, which, if you look at number 13, is the highest college of priests in Rome from the Catholic Church, to get direction about what this old man is. His prudence fell on sterile hearts. The news of the captive angel spread with such rapidity that after a few hours the courtyard had the bustle of a marketplace, and they had to call in troops with fixed bayonets to disperse the mob that was about to knock the house down. Again, this could be an example of magical realism. They had to call in troops with fixed bayonets to disperse the mob that was about to knock the house down. In this, they're literally saying this crowd will destruct the house. Elisinde, her spine twisted from sweeping up so much marketplace trash, then got the idea of fencing in the yard and charging 5 cents admission to see the angel. You could tie this back to religion and how they're capitalizing on what they think is an angel and capitalizing on their religion. And I think many would argue that that is not an okay thing to do in a way to make money off of people's beliefs. The curious came from far away. A traveling carnival arrived with a flying acrobat who buzzed over the crowd several times, but no one paid any attention to him because his wings were not those of an angel, but rather those of a sidereal bat. Here's another example of magical realism. We have another man that has wings, but rather than wings that have feathers, they look like a bat, so people weren't as interested. The most unfortunate invalids on earth came in search of health, a poor woman who since childhood had been counting her heartbeats and had run out of numbers. This is saying this woman literally could count her heartbeats and she was coming to the end of her life. A Portuguese man who couldn't sleep because the noise of the stars disturbed him. At night when he would try to sleep, he could literally hear the stars, and it made him not be able to sleep. And then a sleepwalker who got up at night to undo the things he had done while awake. So this man literally got up in the middle of the night while still asleep and would go back and redo the things that he had done. The angel was the only one who took no part in his own act. He spent his time trying to get comfortable in his borrowed nest, befuddled by the hellish heat of the oil lamps and sacramental candles that had been placed along the wire. Again, here's another example of how people are using religious practices to try to make sense of who or what the old man with enormous wings is. The hellish heat of the oil lamps and sacramental candles just shows you, if you look down at 17, relating to a religious ceremony or act of the Christian church that is regarded as a visible sign of spiritual divine grace. So they're saying or asking for grace from this angel with wings. However, they have him in a chicken coop, giving him very little food and basically trapping him as a circus act, but also using him as something divine to receive grace from. So you'll notice that a lot of the contradiction between the magical realism and the religion is showing how these magical elements bring out the worst in people, or can. So the fear of the unknown, or the fear of not being Christian enough, combined with those two, people are acting in ways that they shouldn't, that actually go against Christianity, rather than loving thy neighbor or doing what we should do. So the magical realism elements and the religious elements in this, the contradiction of the two, actually work together to show us how people do not accept what they don't understand, and how the lack of that acceptance can bring out the worst in them. And then we have another example of magical realism. At first, they tried to make him eat some mothballs, which, according to the wisdom of the wise neighbor woman, were the food prescribed for angels. So we have no idea what angels eat, and it's probably not mothballs. So that is another example of magical realism. You go on to see how his only supernatural virtue seemed to be his patience in spite of everyone and everything that they are doing to him. The only time they succeeded in arousing him was when they burned his side with an iron for branding steers, for he had been motionless for so many hours that they thought he was dead. He awoke with a start, ranting in his hermetic language and with tears in his eyes, and he flapped his wings a couple of times, which brought on a whirlwind of chicken dung and a lunar dust and a gale. So I'm going to highlight this in green because you can relate this back to religion and what I just said. This story is pointing out the contradiction of how people should act and how they do act when they face the unknown. In the Bible, there's a Bible verse that says, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment, and the second is like unto it. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." That verse is a good verse to point out the hypocrisy within religion. These people have put him in a chicken coop. They have stared at him, they've thrown food at him, they've tried to get him to eat mothballs, which are certainly poisonous. They've done all of these things to him and burned him with an iron branding steer rather than just try to give him grace. And they are doing this all in the name of their own religion, trying to figure out what this coming of an angel might mean. They're scared to death that this coming of an angel might be a sign of the end of times. However, rather than drawing closer to God or acting as a Christian should act based upon the Christian faith, they're doing the exact opposite. And so Gabriel Garcia Marquez is making a huge statement about how people who fear the unknown can become more evil, can become more like hypocrites when they don't understand certain things. And instead of just accepting that they may not understand it, they have to try to find some type of meaning. Going on, they go on to talk about how they still try to test about whether or not he is an angel. It says they spent their time finding out if the prisoner had a navel, if his dialect had any connection with the Aramaic, and how many times he could fit on the head of a pin, or whether he wasn't just a Norwegian with wings. So again, they're trying to figure out whether or not he's an angel, and they're doing this in connection to magical elements because in any reality, someone could not fit on the head of a pin, but they're actually wondering if he can because he's an angel. Going on, we meet the lady who was turned into a spider. It says a traveling show of the woman who had only been changed into a spider by having disobeyed her parents. The admission to see her was not only less than the admission to see the angel, but people were permitted to ask her all manner of questions about her absurd state and to examine her up and down so that no one would ever doubt the truth in her horror. She was a frightful tarantula the size of a ram and with the head of a sad maiden. So again, you've got another carnival act coming through town, and people are more impressed with the spider because she can speak and because she will let them examine her. The crack came with the lightning bolt of brimstone that changed her into a spider. Her only nourishment came from the meatballs that charitable souls chose to toss into her mouth. This is how she turned into a spider. And these magical elements right here that are highlighted are examples of how people tie things that happen to them to something supernatural. It says, besides the few miracles attributed to the angel showed a certain mental disorder, like the blind man who didn't recover his sight but grew 3 new teeth, or the paralytic who didn't get to walk but almost won the lottery, and the leper whose sores sprouted sunflowers. These consolation miracles, which were more like mocking fun, had already ruined the angel's reputation. So they're actually saying these were attributed to the angel. when the woman who had been changed into a spider finally crushed him completely. That was how Father Gonzaga was cured forever of his insomnia, and Palau's courtyard went back to being as empty as during the time it had rained for 3 days and crabs walked through the bedrooms. So that they're saying that the cool miracles or the happy ones are tied to the Spider Woman, whereas the uninteresting or the ones that you could make fun of, those miracles are attributed to the spider. And then scrolling down, the angel starts to get better, and he is starting to move around more. And after the Spider Woman came through, people lost interest in the angel. So he finally had a break from all of the people in the town coming to stare at him and trying to abuse him. And so here's an example. He started to go into the house where Elisinde and Pelayo lived. They would drive him out of one bedroom with a broom and a moment later find him in the kitchen. He seemed to be in so many places at the same time. This seems like it would be non-literal, just saying he was always browsing the house, but in magical realism, you could read this as a literal example of his supernaturalness. And then we at last see that he can use his wings. It says, but he did manage to gain altitude. Elisinde let out a sigh of relief for herself and for him when she watched him pass over the last houses. So in the end, the old man with enormous wings was able to finally leave. And you'll notice Elisinde's reaction. She was not excited for the angel that he finally gained the ability to use his wings, but she was relieved that he was leaving because it took out that annoyance in her life. So, going back again through the story, Gabriel Garcia Marquez uses elements of religion and elements of magical realism to point out the hypocrisy within humanity and how people, when they don't understand something or when they see something that they can't explain, do not find acceptance and do not treat that which they don't understand with kindness, but actually do the opposite. They abuse things. They try to find meaning in ways that are not helpful. And this is what he's trying to say within the story, is that as humans, we have to do a better job of treating the things that are unfamiliar with acceptance and with kindness to be able to come to an understanding. So I hope this helps. Use this before you complete the rest of the week's assignments and use this to help you with Monday's assignment.